Hello and welcome to CS230. This is Lecture 12 and Lesson 1. In Lecture 11 we went into some detail about architectural design patterns for the web, and we really talked about how we might implement these using JavaScript. We looked at three core models. One was Model View Controller, Model View Presenter, and the final one was Model View View Model. So it really was a theory lecture, and I said you could implement them in any language. It wasn't just for the web, it was anything that implemented a user interface mostly. So what I'm going to do today in this particular lesson is I'm going to take you through a basic model view controller implementation using JavaScript. Now this will be really simple, and we're going to look at a basic or vanilla or pure, you use all of these terms sometimes, JavaScript. And we're not going to use any framework, and we're not going to use any library. Say Java, jQuery would be a library, AngularJS would be a framework and a library, React is another one, Vue, Knockout.js, there's a whole bunch of them, okay? But we're just going to look at plain JavaScript and see at a fundamental level, how do we build this kind of architectural design pattern? So I found a really nice discussion on this in Stack Overflow, and I would really recommend that you use these when you have issues or difficulties. They're written by programmers for programmers, lots of design notes, in digest form. The only problem I find with this is that, it's very difficult early on sometimes to decide, well, which is the right answer, which is the answer for me, which one do I understand? And sometimes, they contradict each other because, development is contested a lot of the time, or they have a very particular perspective. Anyway, this particular one I thought was okay. It showed you how to build a hello world in Model View Controller pattern. Now, the example, and there are lots of them there, is great. It doesn't actually provide you with any accompanying working HTML. So I've created the code, I've extended the code to show you how you might update the model using a controller that handles some kind of button events. It wasn't in the actual examples. Or it may be spread across 5 or 6 of the examples, and I've digested it into one that actually works for you. So I've shown a couple of ways to actually render the view, because the whole idea of the view is that the view should be able to give you some view of the model, and it's not set in stone. If you want multiple views, you could have multiple views. So you could have many views using the same controller, and you could try that out yourself if you want. So before we get and dig into the code, remember with the model view controller, the controller listens on some kind of interaction or event stream, button clicks, whatever. And here, for this particular one, we're going to use buttons. The model then is an abstraction of some data source. And this example, it's just some user data that's comprised of a username and a user number. The view knows how to render the data from the model. That's the view's job. And the controller tells the view to do something with the data that's contained in the model. So here the view knows absolutely nothing about the model. You can see here we are, the view, it views nothing about the model itself. It just gets information from the model. It implements some kind of interface which we can access. The model knows nothing of the view and the controller. The controller knows about both the view and the model, and it tells the view to go do something with data from the model. And the controller can also update the model. Okay, so that's not too bad. So one of the diagrammatic representations was this one here, and I quite like this. It was good. So here's some code, okay? So we're going to use objects in JavaScript. And you can declare objects using these braces, okay? So here's a model object, here's a view object, and a controller object. And right now they do absolutely nothing. So remember, the model handles the data. So here are the data. So we have a model object with some data, and it's going to be a composite, it's going to be an object as well, username and user number. And we have two methods in here, one called setData, and one called getData. And these are defined as functions. And remember, we can define these functions inside objects, similar like you would have done with Java, for example. So all it does is getter and setter functions, one that changes the data, and one that sets the data, and one that gets the data. So here we have the view. So the view, again, is set up as a model, and the view has some information as well. It knows really what it's interested in. It also has a username, okay? You can see it has username, user number, but these particular ones refer to an object that's held in the HTML, in the DOM, okay? And one is called the input username and the input user number. And we're using the document.querySelector method in order to be able to extract that. So it finds the first element that has this particular class label, or this particular case ID. Okay, so it has a function that updates, and really what we're doing here is we're updating the value of the view with information that we extract from the model. That's exactly what we're supposed to do. Now you'll see I've got a couple of extra ones in here because I was playing with it for different kind of views and so forth. And so that's okay. And the controller then, so the controller knows about the model, it knows about the view, not surprising. And the controller then has some way of updating the view and updating the model. So we have two functions here. One that updates the model and tells you update this view with this model, okay? And then that says update this model with the data that it gets from the view. So what I've done actually is I'm generating this simple random number to update generating a random number to just update the username, just to show you how we can play with the model, okay? So something you don't get, okay, so the form should look a little bit like this: name, number, click, and the click really just updates the view, updates the model, and you should see that if you update the model independently of the view, you can click this button and get the view updated. So it's this connection between the two. So we're going to use two span elements, one with ID input username, one with ID input user number. They have some default values, of course, here, and we have a submit button and a model, update model button. Easy. Now we need to have some events, okay? So remember we said that the controller is the one that listens to events, okay? So here we have adding an event listener or a button an event listener to this button called submit button, and we're just telling it that the controller needs to update the view, okay, with the controller, and we have an update the model to say we want to update the model, okay? So it's fairly straightforward in that regard. So let's have a look at the code. Let's have a look at the code, yeah. So the code, I have it in Visual Studio Code here, and I've written some comments in here, and I've showed you how you might have a separate view here if you want to have a different view to the view that's here. You could have two different kinds of views. The code here is as in the example that we looked at. Here we're setting up the event handlers. It's really important that once you set up your controller and your event handlers and your models, that they happen after you've set up these things here. Otherwise we'd have to wait until the page was loaded, set an onload method, and then we'd work from there. Here's my little random number generator. All it does is generates a 9-length string of numbers. Okay, we've seen this before, and it's fairly easy. And these are the event handlers. So we go to our example, and we can just have it working here. Let's have a look at it here. So we can click, and it updates the number. Nothing's happened because it's updating the view. But we can click to update the model. And when we click, we can see that the view changes. Okay, so update the view model, change the view, update the model, change the view. So we're handling and responding to the events. And really, that's all it does, you know. So it's not too difficult, really, in that regard. Let's go back. Okay, so really all we did was looked at the model view controller pattern using pure JavaScript. There's no framework used in this particular one at all, and it's short, easy, and fairly straightforward to understand, I think. Okay, thank you very much for watching.